All right, now we got to start all over. The earth cooled dinosaur. So where am I at on B? And it could be intro, remember, open-ended. So we analyze motion joint by joint. Somebody pick out a joint that is in a different position than anatomical. Okay, the hip. Can we be a little bit more specific? Because we got two options, right?
Right.
Ah, okay. The right hip. So that would be nothing but fancy equipment here. This one, okay. Is that an anatomical or is that moved from anatomical? They moved because your mind is like, oh, it went back. Yeah, that's tricky, huh? It's tricky. Let me ask you this. Is this leg as straight or roughly straight as it is here?
Yes.
Yeah. So it kind of stayed straight. So did the hip joint move significantly from where it started? No. And you see, you figured that out. You figured that out. So the right hip didn't move as the person did this. But it looks like it might. Nice use of English. It looks like it might have did. Does that make sense? Because if you were only taught extension is when the leg goes back, you're analyzing for context clues. We as humans are great at context clues until it's the wrong context clue. Guys, this illusion has been playing on our minds since we were kids. Spell milk, M-A-I-K, M-I-L-K. What do cows drink? Milk. Ooh, cows drink water, right? Yes, thank you for getting me back on track. All right, so right hip, and mostly anatomical, right? Left hip is not. What's the position of the left hip? Flex. It's more in the fetal. This, from the hip's perspective, just assume be here. Thank you, stick. Supporting my lack of balance. It's the same thing. Does that make sense? From here to there is the same as from here to there from my left hip's perspective, because my left hip doesn't care about a global reference. It's just like you, am I more in fetal or less in fetal? And this class is going to be a lot of clarifying some confusions, which is not on you, it's on me. Fetal is flexed. So you can't reference things from fetal because it is flexed. You have anatomical position. Fetal gets you into flexion, but we reference position not based off of fetal, but anatomical, whether I'm flexed or extended. Because being fetal is being flexed. Does that make sense? Okay. All right, what about shoulders? Are my shoulders in a different position than when I started? Yeah. What position? It sounded like I was like from California. Yeah. And again, the illusion. What do you mean? They're straight. Look, they're straight here and they're straight there. Yeah, globally. Why do you think I establish absolute and global references? Absolutely, they're straight relative to ground and gravity, but you know what they're not straight in reference to? The joint that makes up the shoulder. Or I could do this. It's the same thing. So yeah, you have shoulder motion here, even though it may not look traditional. So the shoulders are flexed, bilaterally flexed. We would say the left hip is flexed, the right hip is in anatomical position. Cool? So to go from here to there, I'd have left hip flexion, and I'd have bilateral shoulder flexion in terms of what had significant motion. Remember, guys, I'm never going to ask you that. Right? It's going to be obvious stuff. Okay? Any questions about this before I go on to the next clarification? Yes, ma'am.
You said shoulder flex, left hip flex, and right hip just anatomical? Or what would you say?
I'd say the right hip didn't move.
Okay.
And remember, movement isn't movement is specific to joint motion, which is specific to joint rotations. That's another way to look at it, because you can't say, well, the leg did something. The leg is not the hip joint. That's made up of the femoral head and the ilium ischium and pubis forming the acetabulum. Just because my leg moves doesn't mean my hip moves. Just because my arm moves doesn't mean my shoulder moves. Cool? Cool? We're good? And for those of you that didn't see my study tip, I know this is tough. Try not to go straight to the answer choices, because the answer choices are going to be flexed and flexing, flexed and extending, extended and flex. Like all the choices are going to kind of sound similar, and that can mess with you. So if it were me, I wouldn't go to the answer choices yet. I would read the question, see what I'm asking, and try to answer it. Just like in class. That's actually why we do a lot of verbal things in class, because I don't want you to have answer choices in class. I want you to just try to figure it out. And then see which of the answer choices match what you know is the answer. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. Now let's go to today's content, which is trying to clarify some confusion. Does anybody remember why I kind of started doing my own packet of information? Does anybody remember that? It's not because I like to write. I have dyslexia. I hate to write. It's because if you open 10 different books in kinesiology, human movement, radiology, there's going to be variations of all these planes and axes. They're not all going to look the same. The physics is the same, but the verbiage in the application is all over the place. So I'm going to give you a couple examples. The one that I used, there's a reason I used it, is it separates each plane individually and shows the axis about the plane, all right? But one of our limitations is this is human movement, position change. That's what motion is. In basic physics, what is velocity? Change in position. No, displacement is change in position. So that's movement. So everything is based off position. But none of these photos show motion. It's inherently tricky. Sagittal plane, frontal plane, transverse plane, but the dude is just, what does that mean? I'm just seeing a fixed picture. And I have to like imagine planes, and then, frontal plane separates the body into front and halves, okay? What does that mean? I'm just saying, like, what does that even mean? If I'm flexing my elbow and I know this is sagittal plane, that has nothing to do with the front and back of my half. Does that make sense? Like, think about it. Frontal sagittal plane separates me from the right side and the left side. What does that even mean? Hey, right wrist, are you separating me from right and left side? So it's inherently confusing. So I did a little soul searching, and I'm going to try to bring it together in a different way. I started off with axes, if you remember, like the X, the Y, and the Z, but I'm going to do it a different way, and we're going to ultimately lead up to where we want to go. Frontal plane separates you from front and back. True. What is the front called? Anterior. What is the back called? Posterior. So by separating you from front and back, we establish an axis concept that's going to go through the front and the back. And the axis concept that comes through the front and the back is the AP axis. And how do objects rotate about the AP axis? In the frontal. It's okay. That's why we clarify now so that you get it right on the test and you make an A. Does everybody see how I walk down that path? But all of these things are views or seeing things. If I want to see frontal plane rotations, I need to look at it from the front and the back. If I separate my body, if I say, well, sagittal plane separates the body from right and left, what does that even mean when we're talking about individual joints moving? It has nothing to do with my right and my left. However, what separates, if I'm going to separate my body into right and left, right and left, two sides, it separates me from sides. Bilateral axis is the sides. So by separating me into right and left sides, I'm going to see sagittal plane rotations from that side-to-side axis. Transverse plane separates top and bottom. What does that mean? I'm rotating my head in the transverse plane. That has nothing to do with the top and the bottom of me. However, by separating me from top and bottom, I establish a polar or longitudinal axis. I establish a superior and an inferior, a top and a bottom. And by looking down at that polar axis, now I can see transverse plane rotation. This is what I use because it's clearer verbiage to me. This is what you could see in other textbooks, a combination of all three at once. To me, that's kind of confusing. And where do all three planes converge? Your center of mass. Again, so what? There's no motion involved in there, and I can move joints not in my center of mass. Me rotating about my center of mass is when I'm doing flips. When I'm doing flips. None of that is context in these photos or these texts. All right, check this out. Some people or some students were having trouble because they were working in clinics that used plain verbiage with fixed pictures. And that's understandable. And look, here's an example. Here is a axial, or what we would call like a transverse plane view. Here is a coronal, or a frontal plane view. And look, they use sagittal. But we know sagittal spins happen here, but they say, yeah, I understand that that's sagittal plane rotation, but if I wanted to watch that rotation, I would look at it from the bilateral axis. And potato, some people say viewing it laterally, but some people say I'm watching the sagittal spin. A sagittal view of the sagittal rotation. Confused yet? Or is it more clear? You know what's even more confusing than that? Some textbooks, I don't know who wrote this textbook, maybe Satan? Some textbooks, no lie, this is how it was taught to me when I sat right there in that chair, and I was like, that's the most confusing thing I've ever heard in the world. Some people say sagittal plane rotations occur about a frontal axis. And frontal plane rotations occur about a sagittal axis. Ooh! Because they have to be perpendicular to each other. So the intent of this slide is not to say this girl is not spinning in her sagittal plane. Not at all. I'm saying a couple things. One is, from a global reference, we would see that in our frontal. Okay? But the point is that if I want to see her spin in the sagittal plane, I want to have a certain view of the sagittal plane action. Does that make sense? And what we call it could be a number of things. I'm going to have a lateral view, a bilateral view. Some people say a sagittal view. I don't like that verbiage, but I'm introducing you to it because you might have heard that in a clinic, in a hospital, in a textbook. Does that make sense? Or better sense? Or more clear? If I want to see sagittal plane action, I don't want to watch the gymnast here. I want to watch the gymnast from the side do the sagittal stuff. Cool? So when you see x-rays and MRIs, and I prefer this verbiage, and you'll probably see a majority of this verbiage, lateral views, AP lateral. AP is a anterior posterior view, a lateral view. But it all starts, in my opinion, look at that, a sagittal view. There's no spin happening. It's just a view from the side. So that you could potentially see the spin doth is perpendicular to that view, or to that axis. Okay. So this would be an example of an AP view of an ankle x-ray from the front to back, and a lateral view of the ankle. However, if the ankle, we have these things called fluoroscopes that we used when I was an athletic trainer working for women's softball at Southern Mississippi. And all a fluoroscope is a live action x-ray. In other words, you could put your foot in the fluoroscope and actually see it moving. Okay, pretty cool. If this was a live action fluoroscope and I said, okay, Jenny, start to move your ankle, we would see the sagittal plane rotation of her ankle from a side view, from a lateral view. And some people, I'm not saying we're going to do it in here because we are not going to do it in here, but some people will call that view a sagittal view because you're watching the spin in the sagittal plane. Cool? All right. Does everybody, and you can lie to me, that's fine. Does everybody see one of the biggest issues with these concepts is that there's no motion. It's just a fixed picture. How do you give context to movement? And that's why, I think it would be cool to improve and give me feedback, like to have individual QR codes under these where you scan it and then like we have somebody representing that person move or I thought of this, but I'm not digitally creative enough to make it to where like the person in blue, like you can rotate the picture to make the person like spin, right? And not only that, guys, you can't see all dimensions at the same time. In other words, you ever wonder why all these planes and axes, they're kind of tilted, right? No one's ever straight, because you can't see all three planes from a straight view. I couldn't see straight from the top. I couldn't see straight from the front. I can't see straight from the side. That also hurts our understanding of the material. It's always angled, so, Your eyes, we see in 3 dimensions, right? Up, down, left, right, front, back. Your eyes primarily see up, down, left, right. Well, why do you think your eyes are curved? Your eyes curve to give you data in the depth perception. They're not flat. They're curved on purpose so that we can get depth data. And it's one of our limitations of trying to show three-dimensional concepts in two-dimensional pictures. But it's okay to understand what the limitations are so that we could work through them and understand the concepts. All right. Global reference. What we got? Frontal plane. About what axis? AP. What about this? Translation. Good. Good. There's movement. It's going up and down, but is it rotating? Is it spinning? And I know this is why I set you up for that question, so that you don't miss it on the test. That's one of our limitations, because this never moves. So it makes sense you want to say, well, that's in the sagittal plane, or this is in the frontal plane. Look how it could go with either. Think about it. Or what about front and back? Ooh, that's totally sagittal. But you could also say, ooh, that's totally transverse. It's going parallel with both. These traditional views don't give context to spin. You know what gives context to spin? Kines 3:10. Context to spin. That's why I do what I do, is to make it make sense. So it's not about halving your body into its inner mass, because again, my wrist has nothing to do with that. It's about establishing axes. It's about establishing axes, fulcrums, axles, points of rotation, whatever you want to call it. It's about establishing the axes about which anything can rotate in the body, regardless of if it's at the top, the back, the front, the back, the left, the right. Flexion gets you into fetal. You need to know that. Extension gets you out of fetal. And every joint in the body has a perspective. Yes, we have a coach who tells the players the play. And the play may be this play, but this play is made up of these players and those players and these players and these players and these players. But they're individual players on the team doing specific jobs to run that play. And it has nothing to do with top of the body, bottom of the body, front of the body, back of the body. I don't know why I just went into a Brooklyn accent. So, any questions? Yes, ma'am.
Okay, you said that the joints need specific what to make plane?
Joints rotate in planes, right? Joints rotate about axes. So if a joint is rotating, think of a plane as a dimension of rotation. We've already established dimensions of straight line. Up, down, left, right, front, back, X, Y, Z. And we use them all the time. What I'm here to tell you is that Newton's laws and all that stuff can apply to rotating bodies as well. And one of the ways that applies is we have 3 dimensions of straight line motion, X, Y, Z. But we also have 3 dimensions of rotational motion, sagittal, frontal, and transverse. How many ways, I'm going to get to you in 1 second, how many ways can this pipe move in a straight line? 6, because it can move 2 different ways in the Y, up, down. It can move 2 different ways in the X, left, right. And it can move 2 different ways in the Z, front, back. And anything outside of that is a combination. Up and to the left and forward. Down and to the right and back. Now we're going to play the same game with rotation. How many different ways can this pipe spin? 6. 2 different rotations in the frontal. 2 different rotations in the sagittal. And two different rotations in the transverse. Our joints and all objects have to rotate in a plane. Objects do not translate in planes. They have their own verbiage for how they translate. So think of it like this. Let's try to apply it, because this class today is all about application. If I were to do a vertical jump, I'm not going to give max effort because I don't think I have enough room, especially in my athletic Crocs. All right. Here's where we're trying to bring everything together. If I were to vertical jump, okay, use your imagination. I just went really high. Me going up and down is not in a plane. However, my knees flexing and then extending are in a plane. Sagittal plane, right? My hips flexing and then extending, sagittal plane. My ankles dorsiflexing and then plantar flexing, sagittal plane. My shoulders extending and then flexing, sagittal plane. But my center of mass going up and coming down is not in a plane, because we have words for that. Up and down. Positive Y, negative Y. Up and down. But one of the first commandments, we rotate to translate. It took those sagittal plane rotations in order for me to go up and down. But I could go up and down in the frontal plane. You know. That's it. Probably my ballerina isn't very good. All right, look. Like a hydraulic lift, man. So in other words, don't just say sagittal is up and down. Frontal is side to side. That's not how it works. We give unto Caesar what is Caesar's. When we're talking about spinning things, we need to train our brain to think rotational world, planes and axes. And when things are shifting, translating, we think of linear concepts. And let's see if you remember. Most movement is a combination of rotational and linear, and we have a name for that. What is it? Yes! General movement. General movement is just how things normally tend to move, which is a combination of rotation and translation. When your tires are bringing you to bourgeois, they're rotating about a plane and an axis. But that rotation is allowing your car to go north, south, east, west, vice versa, including your tire. Okay? Did I answer that? Did I get to your question? Bless your heart. That's me. I'm chasing butterflies.
Is it correct to say, okay, if you're looking at the transverse plane and you want to be looking about like in the view of the polar axis, can you just say polar view or like anterior posterior view or bilateral view? Is that like what you want to hear? Like,
Wow, what a great question. Can you say it? Yes. Can other people who are not on the same page with verbiage be confused? Yes, and that's part of the problem, right? That's part of the problem, is so many of you, and it's not your fault, so many of you have kind of had, well, this is what they say in this clinic. This is what they say at that clinic. This is what my coaches would say. So what I'm trying to establish here is that they have a lot of different verbiage for one concept.
Right.
So I think the key thing for me to establish the lack of confusion is view. Because as soon as you say view, I know you're not talking about the dimension of spin. So you could use that verbiage and say, and in fact, I guess if I had to pick, I would use what they typically use in X-ray MRIs, and that's a anterior posterior view is going to give you a
a view of the frontal plane, but that doesn't mean I'm spinning in it. That just means like the traditional view of the movie screen if the movie was being played on my flat chest.
Right, so on an exam, you would say like, anterior, posterior view, and you just get a view from the front, or no?
Yeah, this is going to hurt. I'm probably not going to give you questions about views.
Okay.
And for those of you that are like, then why are we wasting our time doing it? It's to clean the dashboard off and make it clear so that we can understand the spin stuff. Because some of the view things were getting in the way of understanding sagittal, frontal, and transverse spin, because some of my students could only see this in the context of a view. Does that make sense? So if I can explain away views, then we can get into spins. This is what some of my students in the past would have a problem with. That upper right-hand corner. A bilateral view, but they refer to it as a sagittal view.
You took the sag and like cut yourself in half, that's what you see.
Yes. Yeah. I'm not saying they're wrong.
Yeah.
I'm saying it contributes to confusion.
Yeah.
I'm not saying they're wrong at all. But we could see how it could lead to confusion. Yeah. Potato, potato. All right, guys, here's what I want you to do. Stand up. Get up. It's the first of the month. I know, I've been saying this one, man. Get up, get up, get up. All right, here's what I want you to do. Let's move our elbows. So we're going to have elbow flexion. Show me elbow flexion. Okay. Your elbows are now in a flexed position. Cool. All right, go back down. Simon didn't say. All right, that was stupid. You guys, I want you to rotate your body so that you're facing the main board. Okay. Does everybody understand why I want to do that? So that way you're not looking at me from the side. I want us to all have the same perspective. You guys rotate to your right, to your right, to your right. All good. And y'all going to be to your left. Mirrored images, okay? Now face the front. I still want you to see me. So face the front. Okay. Now what I want you to do is turn to your left 90 degrees. Now flex and extend your elbows. That is still your elbow sagittal plane, but it is now in the room's frontal plane. And both of those are correct as long as we establish the perspective, the reference. A global frontal or an absolute frontal or a local sagittal. You didn't change anything you're doing with your elbows, but you changed how you're doing it in the room. Now you're rotating about the room's front to back. Instead of when you started off, go back to the beginning, you were rotating in the room side to side. Yes? Okay? Or another option could be no. So if you were going to say no, rotate your head side to side. What plane is that? Transverse. For both how you see it and how the room sees it, right? You both see the same thing. That's okay. Every now and then my wife and I see the same thing. We celebrate those moments. Here's where we're going to check for understanding, guys. If you're able, try to flex your hips in your trunk and look down at either the table or the ground and now say no. Now, come back up and try to tell me what plane that motion of your head was in. Locally from your perspective and globally from the room's perspective. And don't say it out loud. Either give it some thought or talk to your neighbor.
You said head or hip?
Your head. Well, you got to move your hips to get your head down here. So it was to establish the start position, and now I want you to do this. I want you to say no, but you're not looking at me, you're looking at the earth. You got an answer? All right, you got an answer? That's okay. You know what's important? In 2 weeks, you're going to have an answer. And that's what's important. These are the kind of questions I'm going to ask on the test. All right? Because I want to get to a couple more questions. From my perspective, is this any different than this? Yeah, still my transverse plane. However, I'm no longer from the top to the bottom of the room. Now I'm from the front to the back of the room. So what plane would my head be moving in from the room's perspective? Frontal plane. What would sagittal plane no look like? It would look like this. This is so silly. But imagine like I had like a little putter, like a little plastic putter, and I was trying to putt the ball, and I'd be like, it'd be like sagittal plane rotation. Right? On the test, I got like some little plastic straws. Okay, a couple more. All right, no more. Y'all have a seat.
He must have said this one.
Nah, I got a couple students coming in to talk. All right, guys, this is Sydney. Y'all met Miriam on the first day of class. They are part of the group that helped me reformat the textbook. They're also part of the group that's helping me do the Instagram page. In fact, I told them about your idea about that, so they liked it a lot when they heard it. I mean, they were like cheering. It was crazy. Yeah, it was crazy. It was lit. So Miriam and Sydney are here to tell you about a brand new kinesiology organization. And so I'll turn it over to you guys.
So my name is Sydney Boudreaux. I am the president of the new Women in Kinesiology Society.
And I'm Miriam. I am treasurer of Women in Kinesiology Society. So we're here to talk to you about women in kinesiology. We're open to all kinesiology majors and minors. Anybody can join. We are mainly going to be focusing on like community within the college. We are going to focus on building relationships with each other, mentorship with each other, and then also having some like professionals come and speak to us about what they do and what we'll eventually want to do. Yeah, that's kind of what we're doing.
So we're going to have one meeting the first Thursday of every month. We're trying to make the requirements kind of not that big of a deal so that everyone can really join and get involved. For people who want to be more involved, we have a fundraising committee that is always looking for help. Our meetings are going to be kind of like half fun, half doing stuff that's really important. So we're going to have Dr. Weimer, Dr. Campbell's mentor. Actually, she will be speaking at one of our meetings. We're going to have a panel of like a PT, OT, AT, chiropractor, PA. If there's anything else that y'all would want, y'all can always DM us in the group and let us know. We're hoping to have like some kind of club events spaced throughout the meetings. We're going to have a fundraiser for our charity, which is called Too Unstoppable. So what that is it's essentially this online platform for cancer survivors, and cancer exercise specialists run it. So they have these online workout programs that they can do. It's not some physical therapist who just kind of took on a cancer patient but doesn't know exactly what to do with them. They're specialists who are certified to do what they're doing. Each survivor is paired with another one. It can be local, or it can just be through like a group chat or a forum, and it's just all about being supportive in the community. So that's our main fundraiser, and so we're always looking for volunteers for that as well. So the group me is actually being passed around for anybody who wants to join, just scan the QR code.
And then if you want to be on the fundraising committee and you're joining the club, you can DM any of the admins
Yes.
on the group me.
We also have an Instagram. If you look up Women in Kinesiology, it'll come up, but it's UL Wicks.
Can I talk a little bit about, let the guy talk about the women's
Yes.
club? But it actually means a lot to me. All of the sports that I worked in college as an athletic trainer were women's sports. I worked women's volleyball here at UL. I worked women's volleyball at Southern Mississippi. I worked women's softball for 2 years at Southern Mississippi. We would get girls who had never lifted a weight in their life. They didn't have strength and conditioning in high school. And you know what's the biggest reason? Because the gym was prioritized for the boys. And when my girls would come in and have never lifted, that puts them in more risk for injury. And that's not fair to them, that's not fair for us. When I was a major my major professor, Dr. Weimer, she, 4th degree black belt, she's the godmother of my oldest son. And I saw the world of academia through her eyes. Example, we're walking down at Auburn on campus, and a student or even a professional would call the guys who we were with professors, doctor, and then they'd get to Weimer and say miss, even though she had a doctorate. And under her breath, she'd be like, did you catch that? I'd be like, yes, ma'am, I did. So we have to realize that there are challenges sometimes in kinesiology, in a sometimes male-dominated, driven, right? Sometimes it's tough for women's issues and things to kind of, get talked about. My biggest thing is strength and conditioning for the girls, man. The young girls that don't have the same strength and conditioning as the boys. And it's not even about making them bigger, faster, stronger. It's about making them safer. It's one of the reasons why injury rates, who's had an ACL surgery in here? It's usually my opinion. And I'm not saying you didn't have a good strength and conditioning program. So for me, that's why I want to get involved, is to kind of bring some light into some of those topics, some of those issues. But I know you guys are going to be doing a heck of a lot more than that, networking and interview processes and helping each other apply for graduate school and going visit when they have like open houses. And so I think it's pretty cool.
We're planning on having like a resume workshop too, to kind of build up your resume for trying to get a PT Tech job or any other job. And
So
then
how would they contact you? Like, what's the biggest way for them to get in touch with you if they're interested?
You can do it through the
That right
Instagram or
there.
the QR code.
Outstanding. Outstanding.
So you said y'all were gonna be doing resume building, like, finding things to get experience in for the resume, or?
We can help you with that too, but we were gonna kind of do a workshop like how to structure your resume and how to make it look appealing.
Do's and don'ts, tips, tricks. All right, guys, y'all mind hanging out a few minutes after? Maybe y'all have some personal questions. Guys, y'all have a safe weekend. Please, I want everybody who's in here on Friday morning to show up Monday morning. All right? You know what I mean?
fundraiser.
This is,
There's
that
like
would be a
volunteering,
lot
either your
of
time.
So orange circle is
Yeah,
a
but
big time.
yeah, Thursday's like,
So
I work literally every day.
because what happens is that
But
you can
I am
only
interested, so I'm
move
gonna
so
join
much
the
before you
team
get
and
hurt.
see.
So you actually have to move differently in order to,
I
it's
didn't
actually a
realize,
combination of.
well, I saw your
different
picture in there, and I was like, oh,
So we're not gonna do all that sort of.
I was like, I was
So like these two pictures, like I was getting so questions.
That's okay, that's
Yeah.
why we're here.
Oh,
Yeah.
I didn't want to bother, like, I just did raw students, and I was like, oh, let me just, I don't know when you took this class, but like, I'll be
Yeah.
Well, so right now,
And I think the exact same thing, it's just a different. So it's still.
I saw,
Now, how we
like,
see.
I think maybe you posted on Snapchat, but like me and Tyler were at the exact same time one of the days. Yeah, I was like, oh,
How
we have to
users
have
are.
anyway. But so I just
It's actually.
and see, like the fundraisers are usually like Saturdays or, you don't know, like,
we don't
how
have
to
to
work
worry
on
about
it.
it, but it's fine, or whatever, because
Okay,
it's
well,
trying to figure it out.
Yeah, I do wanna like,
So
like, my belt for like
perspective.
graduate
You
school and
would
stuff
see.
like that. What was time?
In other words, my shoulder motion here to here would be the exact same as your shoulder.
Yeah.
That's why you see front, but I still see
Okay.
side. Yeah, yeah.
Is there some of those, like, the requirements, like I
So
just,
I might
like I
be
said,
here,
like,
and I do
That's what we're
this,
trying to
I
do,
still
just
see
wanna, like,
satchel, but now you see
Yeah.
front. And that's
I
totally
think that's
okay.
awesome.
Yeah.
I guess I'll see y'all
And
around.
when you say global reference, like is that like a, you're like,
It's
oh,
a-
global reference, is that one spot?
Well, yes, it's a fixed reference. How we would use that, like in softball, is, well, I'm a baseball guy, so if I say I'm throwing more overhead,
Yeah.
that's a global reference, because everybody throws sidearm.
Yeah.
It's just more overhead, means like my trunk is leaning more to the side. It's a global reference. Locally, we're all still throwing like this, but globally, it might be a little different. As a therapist, you need to know that because if you're checking somebody's range of motion, globally, they may cheat
Yeah.
to get their handle, but locally, you be, I saw where you cheated.
Yeah.
Here's a great example, if somebody doesn't mind helping me out. Y'all got 1 second?
Yeah.
1 minute, let me see. Yeah, I'll see. I think to me, this is the best example. Okay, I need somebody to lay on the table on their tummy. I'm gonna do a range of motion. Lay down on your tummy. I think this is the best example of what we will do. Okay, flex your knee. Okay, we're gonna do a range of motion. Okay, I'm gonna internally rotate your hip and I'm checking your motion. Now, she should have 35 to 45 degrees of rotation. But if I don't check for reference, you see how her pelvis is going up? And look at all this motion. But you're cheating right there, right? So globally, if I had a goniometer and I'm just looking at it here, I might give her credit for 60 degrees of motion globally. But I have to understand your hip motion is a local reference. So what I need to do is say, pelvis starts to come up, that's where you end. That's where it stops. That's a local reference. Does that make sense?
Do you
So-
feel it or do you want to see it?
No, I can feel it.
So that's why it's important to establish global fixed references. Usually it's from ground to gravity. We reference things from the ground. We reference things from gravity because they don't change. But a lot of times that can mess with our illusions because we want to reference everything from ground to gravity.
Yeah.
And you know, when people are doing curls with a lot of weight, do you think they're really using, they're like, they're doing this, and in their mind, maybe they're getting a full range of motion.
But they're really not, they're going like.
Globally, they're moving it up and down, but locally, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, the
All
one
right, guys.
thing that confused me. is
Just
like-
one? That's progress.
Well, okay, so
It's just messing. Go ahead.
I understand like planes when I'm looking at the joints. But when you were talking about like the room view,
Yeah.
that's kind of messed with me because like naturally, yeah, you're shaking your head, that's transverse. And no matter where you're at, you're shaking your head, that's transverse from the view of that joint or that motion. But then when you said when you bent all the way over and that's frontal,
That was messing
I was
up.
like, what?
Okay, no problem. Let's think of it like this. If I were to, if I were to spin
If Miriam's gonna work with children as an occupational therapist, so let's say I'm one of her kids she's working with, and she says, okay, little Brian, spin to your right, and I'm gonna do like this. We would say transverse, no problem, right?
Right, that makes
Okay.
sense.
Little Brian, spin to your left. Okay, no problem.
Transverse.
But then, what if she says, okay, little Brian, lay down, and now spin to your right?
Frontal.
But aren't I doing the same thing?
Yes.
So do you see how it's similar, but yet it's different? So the similarity is the local reference, and the difference is the global reference.
So
So
on
I
an
would be
exam,
rolling in
would
the
you,
room's
like,
frontal plane.
on an exam, would you like word it where like what reference
I
you're
have to.
basing it off of? So
I
you'd
have
be
to.
like, from a global
I have to.
reference,
I have
what
to.
plane is
I have
this
to.
joint
Absolutely.
spinning in?
I have to give the opinion. I have
Okay.
to say,
But
this-
if you were to say like from the client's perspective,
I have to give you the perspective.
okay,
The only time I don't have to give you the perspective is when the perspective is the same.
is the same for both. Which, I mean, if you did this is the same for the person
Yeah.
and for
So,
the
so that way, so for that
That'd be
reason.
transverse.
Correct, so for that reason, I don't have to say global
You
or
don't,
local.
you just,
They're
okay.
the same.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, so local and global is the verbiage.
Mhm.
Okay.
Cool. Good?
Thank you.
Finally, man, your mom's so nice. She cares about you. This is,
It's like 30 minutes ago.
but I'm doing all things fresh. So what I did is I used the summertime